The last thing I remember from April 23rd, 2011 was closing the garage door. 2 days later, I woke up in ICU, hooked up to all kinds of tubes and machines, and I had no idea how I got there. April 23rd was a beautiful Saturday spring day. First riding day of the season. My wife Vicki and I got on our our Honda Shadow 750, and we rode off down the highway for some summer fun. Unfortunately, a car coming from a side road ran the stop sign and pulled out right in front of us. I'm told that what happened was I had no place to go. I jammed on the brakes and slid the bike down, laid it down, and went underneath the car. I was jammed under the car. My wife was off to the side, and it was a horrific scene. Didn't take long for people to arrive, and eventually we were airlifted to the local trauma hospital where the doctors and nurses and the team did what they do best, put us all back together. I had life-threatening injuries, so they gave me lots of blood to keep me alive, but they also did all kinds of work with their rods and their pins and their staples and whatever else they have in those places of healing and recovery. The day before this happened, life was good. I had life by the tail. I was training for my next marathon to try to get faster. I was working internationally. I had a lot going on for me that I was so excited about. And I would say that my purpose was as strong as it had ever been in my life to that point. I was making a difference, and life was good. But the problem is, I was a mess. One of the things that happened in this accident, and we found this out a week later, is that this infection that I picked up off the highway, a very bad bacteria that's normally found in manure pits, got inside of my leg. And a week later, my leg I needed to have another operation. So I was on this table and heading down the hallway to operation number 2 and then operation 3 2 days later. But I'll have to say that in all of that detour, I was extremely optimistic. I had a strong belief. I had a strong belief that I would overcome this adversity and be back living out my purpose and my dream anytime now. It wasn't going to take long. I was in peak physical condition. I had great doctors and nurses, and I was sure that we'd be through this in no time. I had everything figured out. I was going to be back to work by September, back running by October, and back to normal by November. I had it figured out, but was I ever wrong? 4 months into my recovery, I was back in the hospital. The infection that they thought they had was full and alive and well in my leg. I'll have to say that was the high point. I was hanging by a thread in some ways. I think the thread snapped. It was a deep and a dark time. I would say depressed and lonely and frustrated. I even asked the doctors, I said, "Are you going to be able to save my leg? Is this possible?" You know their answer? "We don't know. We sure hope so." Well, that gives you a lot of comfort. So I went home and hobbled up my stairs and climbed into my black recliner, depressed, frustrated, angry. My plan is totally messed up here. Sitting on my recliner, I started asking questions. I was asking questions about what on earth am I supposed to do now? This plan I had was out the window. And it felt like the door to opportunity had slammed shut and they put a lock on it. And I knew that I needed to find some reason, some purpose while I'm in this crazy, terrible place. And it didn't come right away. And I felt like I was stuck in a place that I didn't want to be, was hurting, didn't know what to do. Well, I sat there for several hours. But you know what started to happen? In about 10 hours, give or take 20, there was a crack that started to form. I started to realize that, you know what? I think I can find some meaning in this mess. I think that people like me and recliners like this can find something to do, can find meaningful purpose and activity so that I don't have to sit here depressed and feeling like a victim. So I started to clarify what exactly I was going to do. And I realized, I believed in a fresh way that my circumstances didn't need to limit my success. They didn't need to hold me back from rising in the midst of this dirt pile and finding some gold buried there somewhere. I discovered a new purpose, a renewed purpose. I did things like I took online writing courses. I honed my writing skills. I learned how to self-publish. I wrote my first book, sitting in my recliner. And then I looked at people differently. Every home care worker that came in, I looked at them as someone I could inspire and encourage and give a part of myself away to. Same way when I went into the CAS clinic and when I walked out into the neighborhood, I realized that I could actually make a difference. My purpose now was different, and I was feeling alive because I knew why I was existing once again. But it wasn't quite enough. I still was very positive. I believed I was going to get through this. I had this purpose, but I realized that wasn't enough because this grind that I was going through was very long. I ended up 5,000 hours in my recliner. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but I knew that I needed not just this purpose and this optimism, I needed some realism. I needed to adjust my sails because the wind wasn't letting up anytime soon. So one thing that I did, I would hobble down the hall, come to the kitchen, have my breakfast, hobble back, climb into my recliner, take my Oxy, and get out a 3x5 card. And I would write down the 6 things I was going to do that day to give me a sense of focus. That was my plan. That was my realism in the midst of my adversity. And it started to open that door just a little bit more. As I lived out my purpose with this optimism, I had this plan. I decided that I was going to focus on the things I could control. And I wrote in my journal on one side the things I can control and the things I can't control on the other side. And guess what side I worked on? You got it. On the things I could control. There's lots of people around that are going to worry about the things they can't control. I'd let them do that. Yeah, I took naps every once in a while without any guilt, but I woke up and I went back to work. I worked on my plan. I did my 6 things. And the pain, it was amazing. The pain would be there, but it would be kind of off on the edges because I was focused on some things I could control. I had this purpose. I had this realism. I read men like Viktor Frankl, who really inspired me. He lived during the German concentration camps and was resilient and was able to endure. And one of the things that he said that struck a chord was he said that life is never made unbearable by your circumstances, but by a lack of meaning and purpose. Was that ever true? By the way, I didn't drive for 717 days. But who was counting anyways? Part of my adversity, but the opportunity was there. But then I realized purpose and realistic optimism still wasn't enough. The other thing I came to realize was that I also needed the strength of community. I get it. When you go through a traumatic event, you have a serious loss, something happens in your life, you sometimes just want to be left alone, don't you? Just let me be in my suffering for a while. But I learned very quickly that if I were to try to handle this on my own, I would be in a pile of trouble really fast. I would get overwhelmed and I would not be able to carry this load without the community around me. So when I woke up, there in ICU, my family, my friends were there, and it was amazing. It was awesome, and all the professionals that surrounded me. But then I also realized it wasn't enough to have these people in the room. I needed to let them in my life. I had to open up. I had to say to them, I had to tell them my story and find the safe ones among them that I could share my hurts and my disappointments and my losses. And when I found those people, you know what I found? I found tremendous healing and help. And it stirred hope within me and opened the door of opportunity to be transformed and to transform others. But I also realized I needed something else, because I went back home and I sat in my recliner for hour after hour. My family and friends weren't there so much of the time, and I sat there, and solitude was good, but as soon as isolation started to creep in, I thought, I have to get out of this house. So I'd hobble on down the stairs. It would take me a while, but I'd get on my red scooter, a little slower than the Honda, but it was adequate. And I would say to myself, I am going to find myself some community, because I desperately need it to survive. And I'd go out and I'd push that lever and I'd smell the flowers and look at the scenery and find people to talk to. One particular friend that I got to know was also on a scooter, struggling with a very difficult illness. Now, he did have a much nicer scooter, but I didn't let that bother me. And we would share stories. He just had a surgery. I just had my, maybe 7th surgery. And we'd talk about what we'd been through. And we would just show this understanding to each other and this empathy. And I would leave, going back home, flying back home on my scooter as fast as I could go, energized, ready to get back into that recliner and do some more work, because I had been transformed by community. And I honestly believe that I helped him as well. This conference is all about revolution. It's all about taking the things that happen to us. And I particularly believe that when we can look at our adversity differently, as an opportunity, not as an unwelcome interruption, that transformation can happen in our lives. Adversity hits us all. And if we can see it as something to be embraced, something to be stepped into, with purpose, with realistic optimism, and with community, that can change everything. Not only change us, but change those around us. We are transformed when we have a purpose that's big enough to include stormy weather, hailstorms, the most challenging situations in life. We're transformed when we have this ability to adjust our sails so that when the wind's blowing, we can actually cut through the water and get to our destination. We're transformed when we surround ourselves with people that believe in us, who we can believe in, and travel this journey together. I want to leave you with a challenge. You have either gone through something in your past, or you're facing something right now, or you will face something in the future. I invite you to go with me through the door into the room of opportunity, to look at your adversity, to look at your losses, to look at your suffering, at the things that either have, are, or will happen to you, and embrace them. And find the opportunity in your adversity. And when you do that, you will be transformed. And you will transform your community. Thank you.